In today's episode, I want to talk to you about narcissistic abuse versus narcissistic trauma. Because we see online a lot, and myself included, particularly when I first started out in this work, that we talk a lot about narcissistic abuse because ultimately the narcissist is the perpetrator and they abuse you. And that abuse is perpetrated to you, but actually never because of you. And when we start to talk about narcissistic abuse, it actually elicits a physical reaction in your body. Because let's face it, the thought of you being abused by a parent, a partner, a friend, a co-worker leaves you feeling pretty low and at rock bottom. All of those phrases, certainly that I said to myself, how could I be so stupid? Why did I let that happen to me? Do I deserve that? Is it me? Is it my fault that all of this is happening to me? And my deep subconscious belief around all of that was really genuinely about the fact that I thought I deserved that. I thought it was my fault. And then when I came out of my marriage with my ex-husband, I was so angry at him for a period of time, and then really, really angry at myself. How could I let something like that happen to me? Was I really that stupid to find myself in a situation? And not only in those moments when I realized something was wrong, but I actually stayed. And I didn't just stay for a month or 2 months, I stayed for years. And in fact, in my situation, it wasn't even me that ended the marriage. It was my ex-husband, because I was that much in a freeze trauma response. My perception of staying in an abusive relationship actually felt safer than leaving the relationship. And I know many of you can relate to that. In fact, I've done other episodes on this where I talk about the judgment of other people when you stay in an abusive relationship, because we can never judge somebody who stays in a relationship like that, because people will do what their brain perceives to be the safest place for them, the least amount of pain, and to keep them alive. So anybody who stays in any situation that from your perspective from the outside looks like it's dangerous and abusive, it's because their brain, their body perceives it is actually safer to stay. And that was certainly my perception. When I was in that relationship with my ex-husband, it felt safer to stay, because if I came out of that relationship, I was breaking my family up. My kids would be from this broken home. I'd be a single mother. I wouldn't have anybody. And if I didn't have anybody, well, what did that say about me? Yeah, Caroline, you're worthless. You're not good enough. You're unlovable. So actually having crumbs of love being in that relationship, to me and my brain, my body, my mind felt safer. It felt safer to stay. So if you're listening to this and you're actually still in that relationship, there is no judgment from me. In fact, I just want to send you lots of love and kindness and compassion and let you know that I hear you and I get why you are staying. And anybody else who is judging you with all of that doesn't understand trauma. This is why the work that I do is very much through that trauma-informed lens, because it really helps people understand then, why does somebody stay? Because we are driven to feel safe and in the least amount of pain and to stay alive. And if that is the driving force of our system, sadly, it's not to be happy and successful and wealthy. Unfortunately not. It's actually just to keep us alive in the least amount of pain. So wherever you are right now, even if you are in pain, which if you're involved with a narcissist, I know you will be, your brain thinks where you are right now is actually less painful than something else. And this is why the work that I do in my narcissistic trauma recovery program is really about helping people understand why. What is it that my brain and body are so afraid of, that my brain thinks is more dangerous for me to feel, because that will come from childhood wounds. And again, I've had lots of messages recently from people saying, I had a great childhood. I wasn't abused, I wasn't neglected or anything else like that. And it doesn't mean you have to come from that real abusive, neglectful childhood. Remember, this is all about our perception and interpretation of events that happened to us in our childhood. For instance, for me, my dad not praising me about getting great reports, my perception of that was, I'm not good enough. I should do more and be more. Now, of course, my dad didn't not say anything to make me feel like that, but as a kid, that was my perception of it. So it can very much be your interpretation and perception. So going back to my original point, narcissistic abuse versus narcissistic trauma. Why do I talk a lot about narcissistic trauma in collaboration with narcissistic abuse? And again, there's many, many people out there talking about narcissistic abuse and wanting to help people heal. And absolutely, the more people we have educating and talking about this, the better. But I approach this coming really from a different lens, and that's from that trauma-informed lens. And the reason why I talk about you having narcissistic trauma is because trauma is not the narcissist per se. Now, hear me out, because you might think, hold on a second, Caroline, the narcissist is trauma. But how you feel in your body, and that's your nervous system reacting in the fight, flight, or freeze, how you feel in your body comes from your perception and interpretation of the narcissist's abuse. So it's not the narcissist that is making you feel the way that you do. It's actually what you are saying to yourself on a really deep level about the narcissist behavior. Let me say that again. The narcissist is the abuser, the perpetrator towards you, not ever because of you, to you. What you hold on to is trauma. Now, trauma is what we say to ourselves within our body on a deep subconscious level. The trauma isn't the narcissist. They are the abuser, the perpetrator. So let me give you an example. And I'll use myself. I always like to share and be open and honest and authentic with you guys about, my situation and what I went through, because I think it becomes very relatable then as well. And for you guys to know that I've been where you are, I know what it feels like. And whilst you may look at me now and think, oh my God, Caroline, I can't imagine you ever being like that or feeling like that. Oh my goodness, did I ever? I almost wish I had a film crew filming me when I was literally on that bathroom floor every day trying to stop myself having a panic attack and self-harming. And if you saw me then, you wouldn't even recognize me. I was so much in my trauma brain because my perception, key thing here, remember, my perception and interpretation of my ex-husband's behavior was, I'm not good enough. I am worthless. I don't matter. I'm not important. I am not enough. That is what it was making me feel in my body, the activation. That was what was making me go into a fight, flight, or freeze. It wasn't the narcissist behavior. And the reason why is because my ex-husband still behaves pretty much exactly the same way because he's not changed. But I am no longer dysregulated and activated around his behavior. So where then, if you think about it, well, what's changed then? If they don't change, if the narcissist never changes, how can you ever heal? Well, it comes from what you are saying to yourself about the narcissist behavior. And this is when it goes back to those childhood wounds. So if you imagine as a child, your perception, remember, or interpretation of certain events, now that could be abuse and neglect. But equally, it could be your interpretation, just like for myself, say my dad being unemotional and not praising me or saying that he loves me. So in those moments when those things happen to me in my childhood, that felt really painful because I felt like I'd really tried and I was really trying to please my dad. I desperately wanted him to say, Caroline, I'm really proud of you. Caroline, I love you. And it never came. And my perception of it never coming wasn't because my dad was incapable of showing and giving me that. My perception of a kid was, it must be me. Because any child in that situation doesn't have that cognitive capacity to think, oh, it must be because of my parents' childhood, or it must be because of what happened to them in their childhood. No kid knows that. The child will always look to themselves that it must be something to do with them and it must be their fault in some way. And that is when that childhood core wound starts to form. So for me, my core childhood wound was, okay, if I'm doing all of this work and I'm being really sporty and captain of the teams and I'm doing really well at school and I'm trying to be nice and do my homework and be this good girl, and my dad was never say then, Caroline, I'm proud of you. Caroline, I love you. That felt really painful to me as a child. And that gave me the belief then that I need to do more. What I'm doing isn't enough. So that must mean I'm not good enough. I must do more. I don't matter. I'm not important enough for my dad to say that to me. So I need to do more. And so my protector parts then, and you've probably heard me say this before, people pleasing, high achieving, perfectionism, because the more those parts came up and tried to please, to be perfect, to high achieve, in the hope that then maybe my dad or indeed somebody else would behave in a way that would soothe my core wound, what we call in internal family systems, the exile of, okay, you are good enough, you are worthy, you are lovable. So that pain then, that core pain that happens in childhood, it's almost like in that moment, the brain goes, oh my goodness, I never want you to feel like that again, Caroline. So I'm going to do everything in my power to stop you feeling like that. Enter those protector parts, people pleasing, high achieving, perfectionism, or indeed anything else. And that can include things like procrastination, self-sabotaging, addictions, self-harming, dissociation, whatever those protector parts are, because you weren't born like that, okay? You will have parts of you showing up like an army, trying to stop you feeling that core wound of that younger part of you, what we call the exile. So all of that shows up. So actually the narcissist behavior then in the present for you takes you back to past events. So if the narcissist says or does something to you, remember to you, not ever because of you, to you, and you feel yourself reacting in your body, that's your nervous system, like that radar. So in your limbic system, your emotional part of the brain, there's a structure called the amygdala in your brain, and that's like your fear center. And the hippocampus, which is your long-term memory center. And they are almost having this conversation with each other because it hasn't time-stamped those memories of whatever came up and you interpreted as a child into the past. They're very much like they're live memories still in your body. So if somebody treats you in a way that reminds you of things that have happened to you in your childhood, and because the hippocampus hasn't time-stamped them, it's like they have this conversation. The amygdala, the hippocampus are like, the danger, the pain, and your nervous system then goes, right, I'm going to protect you. And it goes into a fight, flight, or freeze in anticipation of danger, of pain, because it thinks you're going to be in pain. Now, if we know that actually that perception of pain in your childhood came from interpretation of events, not actually the true meaning, because, you know, let's face it, what child do you know that isn't good enough, that doesn't matter, that isn't lovable, that isn't enough? Because they all are, right? This is your perception. So if we know your perception in those moments was actually incorrect, but your brain and your body is still stuck on protecting you of a wound that actually shouldn't have even been there, then the key to healing is if we can go back and heal that initial core wound, so your system starts to recognize, these things happened to me even as a child, not because of me. And yes, I interpreted that as in some way it was my fault, but actually it wasn't. It was whomever was there. It was their capabilities. It was their trauma being projected onto me, and I received it in a way that in some way it was my fault. And and that happens to us as that child, we're still going to keep those repeated cycles for us as an adult. So when I talk about narcissistic abuse versus narcissistic trauma is what you are saying to yourself and what your body is feeling about the events that are happening in your life, i.e. the narcissist. So the beauty of this, and this is where your power comes in, you know, this episode today is not about saying, well, that's it, you're just going to feel like this forever, because absolutely not. Okay. If we know your perception of the narcissist behavior doesn't come from your present kind of analysis of what is going on, it's actually coming from your analysis of what went on to you as a child, where that core wound was formed. If we can heal that earlier childhood wound, which is when I talk a lot about the inner child healing, the reparenting, to help that child, your younger self, really know and feel worthy, good enough, lovable, that they matter, that they're important, then those protector parts that are showing up for you right now won't need to be there, because the role of those protector parts will suddenly go, we don't need to protect her from feeling like this anymore, because actually we know she was good enough. So there isn't a wound there anymore for us to protect. So they will take on a different role in your system, maybe support you in exercise or healthy eating, whatever that is. So trauma is actually about what you say to yourself and what your body feels with regards to your perception of the events in the present moment that haven't been time stamped into the past from your childhood. It's still like they're alive in your body. And I always say they're like little landmines almost in your body, that in that moment in the present, if someone makes you feel that same kind of memory that has come from your childhood, if it's not been processed into the past, you're going to feel activated and dysregulated in the present. So the beauty of this is what you have is narcissistic trauma. Okay. Yes, you have been abused by the narcissist, but that does not need to be a life sentence for you where, oh, that's it, I've been abused now, I'm never going to heal, I'm never going to be able to live a life because this has happened to me. Okay. Healing trauma is about integrating your past experiences into your body, recognizing other things that have happened in your past were not your fault. They happened to you, not because of you. So we don't eliminate what has happened to you in the past, but we timestamp it into the past to recognize that's in my past. It's not in my present. This happened to me, not because of me. This happened because the people around me were projecting their pain and hurt onto me. And I received that because I was a child in a way that in some way I thought it was my fault, but it isn't. So the beauty of calling it narcissistic trauma as opposed to just narcissistic abuse means you get to take your power back, because the trauma of the narcissist only comes from that activation in your body around your perception. And if you change your perception and interpretation, you change everything. Just like I said, my ex-husband's behavior, that hasn't changed. But my perception of my ex-husband's behavior, now that has changed. And that has changed because I've gone back and worked on my core inner child wounds. So I don't need those protector parts in that role showing up anymore. And it means when my ex behaves in a certain way, I get it. I know it's not because of me, because I know I'm worthy. I know I'm good enough. I know I'm lovable. Now, he may not act like it and behave like that, but that's okay. It's not on a scale that just because someone treats you that way, well, it must be I'm not lovable or anything. You know, if I put you in a room of 100 people, they're not all going to love you, are they? But that doesn't mean you're not lovable. And there's a difference between being loved and being lovable. You are lovable, full stop. It doesn't mean everyone is going to love you, okay? That is just their interpretation, their capabilities, but it's down to you how you receive that. And that comes from your childhood. So a lot of the work that I will do in my narcissistic trauma recovery program is all around working on those inner child wounds, time stamping events that have happened to you in your past, so that in the present, you no longer need those other, maybe more destructive protector parts showing up for you. And that can have such a huge effect all across the board for you in your relationships, in your work, in your business. Because if you don't have those protector parts showing up, like procrastination and self-sabotage, like addictions, like dissociation and numbing out, self-harm, eating disorders, emotional eating, it really is life-changing stuff for you when we do all of that. And it's a process, it doesn't happen overnight. But if you actually get the right modalities, the right therapy and coaching, which is, you know, my unique method that I use, narcissistic trauma unlocking, to really help you understand that younger wounded part, the adult self who is feeling dysregulated and activated in the present moment, so you can live your higher self, you know, the positive psychology element of the work that I do, because you deserve it and it's all available. It's just a step process that we need to work on. So I want you to now start to think about, you have narcissistic trauma. That is then in your power as to how you can change your interpretation of the narcissist behavior. The fact that they are an abuser never changes, because they are the perpetrator of the abuse to you. That never changes. But your trauma, your narcissistic trauma, that can absolutely change. And I wanted to do this episode to really help support you take your power back. It doesn't mean it's going to happen overnight, and I want you to know I'm right by your side in all of this. Come and join my community, come and join my program so that I can help support you. And remember, teeny tiny steps in all of this lead to giant leaps. It's not about suddenly waking up one day going, I've healed my narcissistic trauma. That's not going to happen. It's an ongoing process. And remember, healing is a journey. It's never ending. We just keep going deeper and deeper, but what we want to do is integrate into you, not forget. Can't erase the past. We want to integrate those past experiences. So in the present, in your body, your nervous system no longer perceives danger. It recognizes, yes, the narcissist behaves like this as an abuser, but I'm still safe in the present moment, which means we don't get that activation and dysregulation. So remember, think about, you have narcissistic trauma, and I want you to start to take your power back. Remember, this isn't a race, this is your journey, and you've got me right by your side.